What's going on, everyone? I'm Jeff St. Pierre, and this is episode 139 of the Adult Education Podcast. This week, I'm speaking with the host of the podcast 60 Songs That Explain the 90s, Mr. Rob Harvilla. First, thanks for checking out the show. I appreciate you sharing some of your day with me. If this is your first time listening to the Adult Education Podcast, I'd like to say welcome to the family. I'd love it if you would subscribe to the show so you're updated for all future episodes. And, if you wouldn't mind leaving a nice rating or review, I'd appreciate that too. If you do want to connect with me, the best way to do that is through Instagram. We are at Adult Education Podcast. You can see when new episodes are posted, and you can message me with any comments, questions, and suggestions for future topics or guests. I've never found interviewing people to be all that difficult. Now, that's not to say that all of my interviews are great. There are plenty that I will never let you hear. But the whole idea for an interview is to get someone into a comfortable conversation. And I guess that's just never been a huge challenge for me. What is hard, though, is interviewing someone that I'm a fan of. I don't really know how to explain it. It feels like there's added pressure. Like, I already know a lot about them, so asking questions that I already know the answers to kind of feels weird. Then there's the delicate balance of having a good question without becoming an awkward fanboy in the process. Now, I tell you that so you know what kind of horror I faced as I prepared for today's conversation. This week, I had a chance to speak with rock critic and podcast host Rob Harvilla. Rob is the host of my all-time favorite podcast, 60 Songs That Explain the 90s. I've listened to every episode over the last 3 years, and I've wanted to do this interview for a long time, actually. Thankfully, we were finally able to connect. What made this extremely hard to prepare for is that I feel as though Rob and I have very similar weird music tastes. When he references artists during his podcast that are a little bit off the beaten path of pop culture, it's usually an artist that I'm a fan of. Like, he did a whole episode on Sunny Day Real Estate and spent a good portion of another discussing Failure, both artists that had big impacts on my musical tastes growing up. And Rob has this way of discussing his own history that makes the listener feel like he was someone we all knew in high school. I mean, his experiences, though they were in Ohio, are not too dissimilar from my own growing up in New Hampshire in the 90s. And that's, to me, the biggest reason his podcast has connected with so many people. I think we all feel like we know this guy. Like, he was the guy that sat next to us in class and wrote band names on his school book that was covered in a paper bag that he got at a grocery store. I think we all know who he is, and we feel that connection. Rob is getting ready to wrap up the podcast here in a few weeks, which is very disappointing to me, but he did just release a book titled the same, 60 Songs That Explain the 90s. It takes a lot of the thoughts and themes from the podcast and puts them into different perspectives in book form. It's really great work, especially if you're a music nerd like myself. All right, enough from me. Please enjoy my conversation with Rob Harvilla.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I am excellent. How are you?
I'm great. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
The pleasure to talk to you. In the early afternoon, the lighting situation in my office becomes just quite vexing and also like celestial at the same time. It's this rounded window up there that I can't reach to cover, but I'm sorry that I look very strange at the moment.
No, it does have a magical quality to it. You know what? The plus side here is I don't record the video. I just record the audio. I just like to see who I'm talking to.
That's a great relief to me. No, I do the same thing. I cannot handle video at all.
Well, I guess, it's interesting. I wasn't going to ask this question, but since you just sort of said it, how does it feel to be sort of on the other end of things now that you're doing this book?
It's super surreal. I've been a working rock critic for 23 years, since 2000. And I always figured in an abstract, vague way that it would end with a book, that I would write a book that was a culmination, of my career and my genius, etc. And then it started to occur to me that I had to write it for that to ever happen. And then I was depressed about that for like 5 to 10 years. And so that was sort of a trip, but it's surreal to me. I dreamed for years about the moment where the box with your books arrives, and it's on your porch and you bring it in and you open it and it says, the box is sitting here in my office for weeks and I'm scared to open it. I'm not scared to open it, but it just doesn't, there's a weird dissonance between, I know that this book is coming out in a week exactly. And I don't believe that actually at all. It doesn't feel quite real to me yet, in a pleasant way, I think. But it's very strange to be on the other end of that. But it's so awesome just to talk to people who are interested, and to be, on the other side of this for once.
Well, it's kind of cool to see it all come together because I came across your podcast fairly early on in its life cycle. And
Yeah.
this podcast has sort of felt like that baby band that you fall in love with when no one else knows them. You're at a club with 3 other people watching them, cheering them on. And now you can't afford to buy tickets because they're selling 3 nights out at the biggest stadium in the planet. It's kind of funny to watch the progression of this show to I'm telling people that have never heard of it to now people are coming to me. Yeah. Have you heard this podcast? I'm like, yes, I told you about it 2 years ago. Like,
you were into me when it was cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. Totally. It's been wild. I started this in 2020, in the depths of COVID, and I'm just in lockdown in my house with my family. And immediately I just, I got more of a response and more intense of a response than anything I've ever gotten being like a working critic. Right. And I was trying to figure out why that is. And I think that nostalgia, and just that's a factor. The parasocial aspect of podcasting, right? Just hearing somebody's voice, and taking walks with them or road trips with them. Like it's just a very different experience than reading an album review or whatever. There's a more personal connection that we have if it works right. And then as the show progresses, I'm like telling more and more and longer and loopier stories about myself. Like I'm getting personal, like not overly so, I hope. But I didn't start this show thinking that I was going to tell stories from my childhood. I don't know what I thought when I started it, but it was the realization that like my personal stories, which are not of general interest really to anybody else, like by talking about my personal memories, it can activate other people's personal memories, that nostalgia works like that. The same way songwriting works, that the more specific a song is, the more universal it somehow becomes, because how much it means to the singer, and then it means something special if it's something entirely different to you. That's been a fascinating thing to experience, from this side.
I almost kind of want you to go back and sort of do it over in a way, because I think back to those first few episodes, like Alanis Morissette was the first episode. And I'd almost like to see you do that one again now that you're in a different groove with the show. Does that make sense?
I've thought about that. I have for sure thought about that because, the simplest and funniest way to put it is that the show is 10 times longer than it was when it started. The Alanis, it's like 1,500 words, maybe 2,000. Pantera was 10,000. The Cardigans, which I just did, was like 8,500. Like the show is just longer now. And I have seriously thought, about like, I'd love to talk to about Alanis for that long, or Missy Elliott for that long, or Mariah Carey for that long, for that matter. I have seriously thought about doing that, and I may still do that. But yeah, the pure length of the thing is definitely the biggest difference between episode 1 and episode 108.
I'm sure everybody, when they talk to you about it, tells you their favorite episode. So I'm kind of curious, what's the most commonly referenced episode?
Good question. What are people talking to me about? People like the Third Eye Blind, how big of a jerk the Third Eye Blind guy is, like it's sort of a singularly villainous figure, so much so that I tried to like orient an entire chapter of the book around him, right? But, just how adversarial he was with other bands and with his own bandmates, just the litany of people talking shit about that guy, I think was very amusing to people. Inevitably the Nirvana episode is going to be a big deal, and the Courtney love of it all like exponentially multiplied that, and I was glad. I always figured that would be the last one, right? That was going to be the 60th, then the 90th, and then the 120th, and then that started to feel anticlimactic to me. And it's like maybe do it earlier so it's still somewhat surprising, and then the Courtney of it all helps spur that along. But the Nirvana episode, I think by far is the most listened to, the most downloaded. Either that or Alanis, because like people go all the way back to the beginning. Like this isn't linear or serial. There's no real logic to the order in which these songs are occurring. But still, I do this when I listen to, I want to go back to the very beginning, even if that's 5 years, even if I'm never actually going to listen to everything. Like I'm a completist in that sense. And I think that holds true. I'm trying to think of what else people have asked me about in particular. Those are the ones that are occurring to me. Mariah Carey, which was very early on and was like my sort of first, like sort of more sentimental or emo episode, right? Because that
Mhm.
was it was All I Want for Christmas Is You. It was Christmas 2020. It was the first Christmas of COVID, where everyone's like, oh, can I even go visit my family lately? I think it was just a really intense and lonely time. And that's, going back and reading my scripts and listening to these things from the beginning, I think that's an early mile marker in me starting to get a little more personal and realizing that the scope of this show could be widened a little bit, that it can speak to current events without actually mentioning current events. Like there was some mood that I was in, certainly, and it felt like a lot of people were in right at that time that I could sort of capture and use as a prism through which to listen to Mariah Carey. I think that was an important episode, and I do hear about that one a little bit, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head with that one for sure. For me, my personal favorite was the Depeche Mode one, and the reason being is I've never been able to talk to anybody in my life with the same passion for failure that I heard you give in that.
Oh man.
I mean, I was just listening to you talk about failure, and I'm like, this guy gets it. Where has he been for the rest of my life? Like, what is going on?
Fantastic Planet was so rad. Like that was a college radio record. I was a college radio DJ, and like you couldn't actually hear our college radio station on campus, but it didn't matter. Like I just had a stack of CDs behind me, like a wall, right? And I could listen to anything. And like I think we were playing Sergeant Politeness like in rotation, right? And so I play the whole record and it blows my mind. I'm a full-blown Radiohead guy by that point, right? It's all about OK Computer for me. And so that scratches the same itch. But no, that was a huge band to me in college. Did you see any of the reunion stuff? I saw them in Cleveland. I mean, it was pre-COVID, but probably somewhere 2017, 2018. Like I saw them, at the Grog Shop or whatever in Cleveland. And I had never seen them in their prime or at the time, of course. And no, I love that band so much. That's really rad.
No, I unfortunately did miss that tour, and I'm still very bummed about it. I remember specifically because they played the same night my radio station had its big annual festival, so I couldn't make it because, well, I mean, failure is not paying my bills. My job is, so I kind of had to put the focus.
Oh God, that cover of "Enjoy the Silence" is so great. I love it so much.
That whole tribute album is incredible, and you're the only other person I've ever heard that actually owns it or knows of it. That Rammstein cover on there, that stripped song, still haunts my nightmares to this day.
It's hilarious. The bummer, I'm looking it up right now, but tribute albums and even compilations did not survive the switch to streaming.
Yeah.
Right? Just the way that the rights work or whatever, like something like No Alternative,
Right.
or even like the Reality Bites soundtrack, even like the biggest soundtracks now just aren't on streaming in the same way. And I'm fairly certain that I had to go back and find like the hard drive that had the ripped MP3s of that record. Like it's either that or piece it together on YouTube, which I do all the time, of course. But like, yeah, it's a real drag that the youth of America today cannot just dial up Rammstein, whatever, doing stripped. It's hilarious. That's such a great album.
It is really good. It's funny. I work in country radio as my paying job, although my heart lies mostly with rock music, but I kind of fell into country music. And I think the tributes and the soundtracks still sort of work in country because their fans have not been as quick to adopt streaming and digital services. So they actually they just put a Judd's tribute out a week or two ago. And I was surprised when I saw it because I was like, who's buying these things? But the country audience still buys physical media in that way, so it's interesting.
Kenny Chesney albums, yes, that's absolutely true. That's wild. Did you like country music at all?
I knew nothing about it. My line is that the day I was driving into work for the first day, I heard Brad Paisley's song Online, and I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but
I am very familiar with Online. That's a great song. It's a great entry point. I loved him, when I was getting into country, and this was around like 2011. I was working for like a streaming service, and I became the country editor by default. And it was right at the point where like Brad Paisley, Kenny Chesney, early Jason Aldean, Eric Church's Chief was like a huge, huge record to me. That was sort of my gateway where like I got it with that record. So that's really cool. But you're into it now?
Yeah,
I
I mean,
guess you have to.
I think there's been a lot of cool stuff. Like, I mean, as you
Yeah,
know, because you worked around that same I came in 2008, so a similar time period, and there was a lot of rock influence coming into country at that time.
of course.
So
Tom
there
Petty.
were a lot of bands that like were an easy transition for me to really enjoy. And now I've gotten to
Totally.
appreciate a lot of them, and the artists are really cool to talk to. They love, having conversations and hanging out, which I always appreciate too. So
That's awesome.
I did get my first taste of what Wednesdays are going to feel like when your show is over last week when you did not post an episode. I woke up and I was
I
like, "Oh man, there's where is it?" What are we gonna...
I did not want to do that. I was very, very, very bummed to do that. And yeah, I have a lot of anxiety about the show ending for sure. We got to stop. I think
Yes.
inherent to a project like this is it has to stop. There has to be a finite point. It's just, it's time, it's very funny to me that we kept extending it, and what, sincerely, I would think I was near the end, and then I would get near the end, and I'd be like, I don't want to stop. I got all these songs I want to do, and I would keep going, and I got away with that twice. But it's time to find something else to do, which I will do immediately. I don't know what that is yet. I really wish that I did, but I don't. But like, I'm really bummed about the show ending, but I do think it's time, and I am excited, to try and keep this momentum going to do something else.
I don't want to talk just about the podcast the entire time, but I know the podcast and the book are intertwined. But I think it's
Yes,
interesting. Some of the song choices that you've made are not necessarily the obvious choice for that particular artist. I made a little list here.
Sure.
Things like Offspring's
Sure.
Pretty Fly for a White Guy. That might not have been my Offspring choice. I mean, you lay out a great
Yeah.
case for it, but maybe isn't the choice that I would have had for them. Or Counting Crows, A Long December, or Smashing Pumpkins, Mayonnaise. Not necessarily the song that everyone knows by them,
Right. So Mayonnaise was very, very early, and Bill Simmons was the guest, and that was a Bill Simmons suggestion. Sometimes the artist and even the song are suggested by the guests, and I really love that. I love doing something, getting out of my own head in that way is really helpful. I'm sure I at one time I thought I'd do like just 1979, of course. The Offspring, like I'm looking at this, and I think what shocked me when I started to think about an Offspring episode was that I thought Smash, like Self-Esteem, Come Out and Play were so huge to me at the time. But like the songs from that record are bigger. Like The Kids Aren't All Right is the most streaming on Spotify anyway, Offspring song. Like I am very curious about those moments when the song that feels the biggest in real time turns out to not be the biggest. And I know that there are very concrete examples of this that I'm not going to be able to think of now, but I feel like the Cranberries used to work like that. Like it wasn't immediately obvious that Zombie was going to be so much bigger, even than Linger in Dreams, as big as they are. I think it's with the fullness of time. Like Blink 182 is interesting in that sense, in that I wouldn't have necessarily picked like All the Small Things as like the one necessarily that everybody knows. And so, yeah, in some cases, you want to pick, you know, the crowd pleaser, the most obvious song. I toyed with the idea of doing something different for Nirvana for a while and then didn't, because it's just churly. It's just obnoxious really to do anything other than Smells Like Teen Spirit. But like I did dig doing a different Smashing Pumpkin song. For whatever reason, that second Counting Crows record just really, really, really got to me at the time in a way that the first one didn't. I was cool with it. I listened, I liked the radio hits or whatever, but it was Recovering the Satellites that really got to me. And like I tried to convey that in the sense that A Long December has emerged like as this shadow sort of Christmas song, like that was a really cool arc to me. And so I do want to keep that opportunity open. Like Portishead, right? Like the one I just did, I would have sworn to you that Sour Times was like the song, biggest song from them. And it turns out it's not. It's Glory Box, that has twice as many, three times as many. Like I really love the way that these are living records still, even if it's over streaming, even if that's not a complete picture, it does give you a sense of how these albums evolve over time and how some songs overtake other songs, even if the other songs seemed ubiquitous, like in the 90's themselves.
It is interesting to look at streaming now and get almost a real-time look at what people are listening to. I sort of grew up, so you're a couple years older than I am, so we have similar growth in rock music. I was more in the punk rock
Yeah.
side of things in the late 90s, but a lot of the
Well,
bands have kind of resurfaced in the last few years to do reunion tours or do new albums, and a big impetus for that was they realized, wow, people are actually still listening to our shit online. Like, this is great.
yeah.
And I think that's kind of cool to be able to look at that, even for your show, for research purposes, to look at things and go, well, damn, this is the song. Like, it's amazing to have that real time info and not wait for like Billboard or SoundScan or whatever to tell us.
Just the realization, like I knew Wonderwall was a huge song, I figured it would endure. I didn't think it would have a billion,
Right.
Spotify plays, a billion, YouTube views, that's on another level entirely. To hear people, singing Don't Look Back in Anger, at vigils, in England still, like that's tremendously moving. And yeah, it's an imperfect metric, but Spotify, as you say, just to watch the numbers change and punk rock, especially like Blink 182, like touring arenas, putting out new records, in 2023, I don't think is something you would have imagined for them like in 2003 or in 2013 even. But it's just this phenomenon of new generations, younger people now discovering these bands and finding something in them that I found in them when I was young in 1996. Like that's awesome.
I love the idea of Green Day going on tour to massive stadiums. I do feel like they missed the boat because it's Green Day, Smashing Pumpkins, and Rancid. I feel like it could have been Green Day, Offspring, Rancid, and they all could have played their 1994 seminal albums from start to finish.
Oh, that would be so great.
Like, how amazing would that have been?
That would have been extremely amazing. Starting off with Rancid. Is that Let's Go? Yeah.
I want to say Let's Go. Yeah.
All right. No, that would be fantastic. I was talking with somebody yesterday, like the biggest concert in Ohio in the 90s, from my perspective, was Green Day at Blossom Music Center, like a big outdoor amphitheater, right when Dookie was getting huge, like right there in 1994. And there was a grass fight on the lawn, and like everybody seemed to be at that show. It was like a back to school show almost. And I love talking to people who grew up in the Cleveland area who were there also. Like that was so formative to me. And to think about them still putting out records, and the way that like American Idiot, like to have a second act that successful, not a lot of bands did. Pearl Jam hasn't had an album at least as big as their first three, kind of by choice, right? Like Pearl Jam sort of decided on having more of a touring, core fan base, not trying to be pop stars, even rock stars necessarily anymore. And that's awesome. Dave Matthews Band being like the biggest touring act of the first decade of the 2000s, and still now, and still being ubiquitous as they were in the 90s. Like, oh, that is so cool to me,
Yep. I've got one of those Green Day memories too. I grew up just north of Boston. So that infamous Green Day show in Boston, that was the free radio station thing. I've
read about that.
Literally on my way to the show. And my mom was like, this is not happening. You are coming home. Like, you are not going to be a part of this action. And I like had this hatred for her in a weird way for a long time for that, because I missed that. But she probably saved my life in some ways.
I was going to say, I can understand your anger in the moment, but that's an excellent mom move right there, because that did not sound like a good time, actually. Yes.
So diving back into the book and the podcast, you mentioned Third Eye Blind earlier, and one thing that I feel like I'd have a hard time with if I were ever to try to be a rock critic is being critical without being a dick. And I think there's a fine line between writing something to express an emotion or express a feeling about what you're listening to or what these people are about, where you kind of have to stop in a way. Have you found yourself into trouble? Like Third Eye Blind's a great example. Have you ever found yourself in trouble by crossing that line and people are like, hey, Rob, that was kind of mean what you just did?
I think it was important to me subconsciously at first, but then more consciously as I went on, that I didn't want to be a dick, right? That this worked so much better as a celebration, and it was less for me about insulting any one particular artist, but insulting like the fans of that person. Like, if you're like me, if you're in your 40s now and you still love X, Y, and Z, and I don't, like, there's no value in me shitting on them, and in essence, shitting on the music of your youth, right? Like, so much of this show and this book is predicated on the idea that this music is holy to me because I was a teenager and I loved it and I still love it. And that's so important to me and so personal to me. It's more about not wanting to offend the fans than the artists necessarily. The third eye, he's such a special case, but what drove that episode is other people talking about him. Like, it's the music, like Semi Charmed Life holds up. Like, that record is legitimately phenomenal as an album. And I saw them on tour. I mean, it was probably 5-7 years ago now, but they were great, like even 5-7 years ago. It's not the music, it's him, it's his personality and all the bandmates he's alienated and all like the touring mates he's alienated. And just, he does seem like just such a swaggering sort of jerk on principle. Like, he's a rock star in the way that so few 90s rock stars were. Everybody was so tortured and mumbling and sort of trying to pretend like they weren't in the spotlight even while they were in the spotlight. And he was so different. And so that episode does kind of stand apart as other people trashing him, but in the service of celebrating the music. What I always talk about, the one genuine moment of like villainy in the show's history is the REM episode when the guest hated REM.
Yes.
And I wanted to try that once. I wanted one time for the guest to hate the song or the artist. And like, I love REM so much. I love Night Swimming, the song, so much. So it's like, I'm going to be gushing about this. It's going to be ridiculous. We need a counterbalance. Let's get the guy who hates REM to come on. And he did. He was great. And he made a great case, for why they weren't the greatest necessarily. But like, people are still mad at me. And they should be mad at me because I brought him on and he did great at what I asked him to do. But I don't think, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I tried that. But I do think that there is a core of sort of kindness to this show that I do cherish and I do try and protect. And I just, even with something like Achy Breaky Heart with the Macarena, right? I think what people hate about those songs isn't the songs, it's the ubiquity of the songs. It's the fact that it was rammed down your throat, that you heard it 200,000 times, even if you didn't want to. You didn't buy the CD, you didn't go to the show, but it was everywhere. It was inescapable. And that's what you hate. I don't need to hear Cotton Eye Joe ever again, but like, it's not their fault. You know what I mean?
It's funny, Billy Ray Cyrus, I don't ever have to hear Achy Breaky Heart again, but like I said, I work for we don't play it, no, but we do a thing on Billy's birthday every year. So every day on my morning show, we let the audience pick a song that we're going to play. So we put it up on Twitter. There's a poll. You can choose which of the 3 or 4 songs or whatever. Then we play the winner. Every day on his birthday, we put Achy Breaky Heart against Achy Breaky Heart. We're like, look, we're playing it. So just get over it. It's playing today. This will be the one time this year.
That poll, that's a cool poll.
We always have fun with that one. So I was interested to see how the book was going to come together because obviously the podcast is, it's about one song, quote unquote, but you talk about a lot more than one song in each episode. But I was curious how you were going to form the book together. And I kind of love what you did in that you put a lot of the songs into sort of categories and then sort of make them a family in a way. Am I describing that the right way?
That's a bit, I make them a family is a really lovely way to put it. And I really, really dig that. It's obviously I start out and it's like, I got 600,000 words of scripts of raw material and I can't just throw that in a book and call it a day. Like, I have to radically condense this, and so now what I want to do, make them a family is such a rad way to put it. I got 10 chapters. I got 120 or so songs. And I just want to make connections that haven't necessarily been made before. And some of them are personal to me. Like, the book ends with just a lot of songs with personal connections to me that don't necessarily hang together in any sort of musical sense, right? To go from Tom Petty, to Janet Jackson, to Lisa Loeb, the connective tissue there is just an intense emotional experience that I had, involving these songs. And, at the end of the book, I think hopefully the rest of the book is sort of justified having a chapter that's sort of oriented around very personally my experience. But the sellout chapter, right? Like, there's the Green Day selling out, there's the Coolio selling out, there's the No Doubt selling out, or the Mighty Mighty Bosstones. There's the Pantera not selling out. I just sort of interrogating that idea, that was so 90s and sort of left in the 90s. We think of it now as just an artifact, a mentality we do not have anymore. We would not begrudge a Green Day for signing to a major label, to get their music to more people. The idea that that was some sort of betrayal is so very 1994. But I do think that, there are many different definitions of selling out, so let's try and amass, get 12 songs together that sort of explore that idea.
Yeah, I think you did a great job with it too. I'm about halfway through so far, and just been fascinating to read through and really get more of you and your insight, because I think along with the nostalgia, I appreciate someone who has a fandom in their heart for a lot of this music too. I like reading a rock critic's words about songs they appreciate,
Yeah. I don't think I've ever been a particularly like trashing things sort of critic. Like I have enormous respect for rock critics who pan records well, who trash records well, and it's like I grew up reading Rolling Stone, Spin, Pitchfork, and like the negative reviews are more fun, and more memorable and more impactful often than the positive reviews, and I've tried my hand at that from time to time with nominal success. But I do think this show just worked better as a celebration, because like you're into whatever you're into, and you were into whatever you were into, and that's so precious to you at this point that I don't want to mess with that or try and talk you out of liking something just because I don't like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So we're at a point in the podcast world that you've got about 11 or 12 episodes left, I think, before you hang it up. And I don't want, I'm not going to ask you who you're going to do at the end here, because I actually like being surprised. I've got a list of songs that I've been working with to see if you'd go with some of these songs.
Awesome.
But I'm kind
How am I doing?
So far, pretty good. I mean, I don't think there's been any like real misses. There have been some, like there are certainly some artists that were more on the fringe that I didn't know you were going to, like Portishead. I love Portishead. I didn't know you were going to use Portishead in the show. You know what I mean? Like there were artists like that.
Yeah.
Or Sunny Day Real Estate. I'm a big fan of theirs. I loved them when I was in high school.
That was a more obscure one relatively.
Yeah,
sure. People.
Great to see him there, but I didn't see them making it into this point over, say, Garth Brooks or something. You know what I mean?
Right. No, I get you. I totally get you.
I'm curious. Everybody has suggestions for you, I'm sure. Your friends, family, whatever, have all said, hey, you got to do this song. What's the weirdest one that someone has said to you?
What's the weirdest one? What's weird and how often it comes up, and I'm still wrestling with this, is the Tragically Hip.
Interesting.
Who are Canadian. Like, I think if you were in Canada, they were huge. I think it's very hard to understand how huge they are in Canada if you don't live in Canada. But I've had so many people swear to me, and I sort of knew them as like, they're not a jam band, but like jam band adjacent, like sort of in the same universe as DMB, Counting Crows, maybe a couple hits on the radio for me. Like I remember Ahead by a Century at some point, but I think it's almost a fish situation where it's not necessarily about individual records or songs. Like just they're so culturally impactful in Canada. And I've meant to do the deep dive and meant to do that forever. And I very well may. Like I have, you're right. I have 10, 11 episodes left. I know what they are. I know what they could be. I know what they are right now, but that could change. Like Portishead was on the bubble for a very long time. And then I just sort of woke up one day. I was like, I want to do it. Like I want to try and keep open that flexibility to swerve, if only in my own head. And so, all right, I'm trying to think of who else. There was a huge run of Blind Melon. Like it almost felt coordinated, which I guess I can't rule out, but it was like a half dozen to a dozen people. So, and like, that's valid, right? Like No Rain was massive, and that's a fascinating story. And I sort of snuck that into the Soundgarden episode a little bit, but it's no one suggestion on its own is weird. It's when I get a bunch about something that I wouldn't necessarily have expected. And I really dig that. And of course this stuff does influence me, like I try to answer every DM email that I get. I love suggestions, I love them even when they're phrased as like, what is wrong with you? Why haven't you done that yet? I dig that. I dig that energy too, honestly.
Yeah, Blind Melon was the other one. I knew there was something else that I had listened to in one of the shows, and I was like, literally no one else that I've ever met knows the song Galaxy by Blind Melon. And then here comes
Man.
Rob Harvilla.
That was my song, man. It was just, I just listen to alternative rock radio all day, every day, you know, for the entire 1990s. I have so many songs in my head, you know, like that, you know, and like I heard No Rain a billion times, and I dug it, okay, but like Galaxy was the one that connected with me, you know, maybe as like the underdog. I don't know what it was, but I really liked that song, and I still do. Yeah.
Well, I think what I need is 8,500 words on Tal Bachman's She's So High, if you want to dive into that
one. Whoa. Said that to me. That's a good song. Is he English? What is he?
I think he's Canadian, right? Because isn't he the son of Bachman Turner Overdrive?
You're right. That's correct. She's so high. Canadian.
There he is.
Extremely Canadian. 1999. That's the other thing, right? Is like the 90s, like culturally, decades don't begin in 1990 and ends at the dawn of 2000, right? You know, like the myth, of course, is that like the 90s start with Smells Like Teen Spirit, which is arguable, right? Like before that, it feels like an extension of the 80s. Once you get into 98 and 1999, like Eminem and Britney Spears do not feel canonically 90s, right? Like they feel beyond that. And so I wouldn't have guessed that was 99, but I guess that, yeah, that was a song like I heard a billion times, you know, on early 2000s pop radio. Like that would be a great episode. Bachman Turner Overdrive, man, I'm into it. I'll put it on the list. I don't think I've ever gotten it before, and I'm psyched.
If you need a guest for that one, you know where to find me.
All right, I do know where to find you.
Well, Rob, listen, I appreciate your time. Seriously, you've brought me so much enjoyment over the last couple of years. I've really loved following along with this podcast. I love the book. I'm glad there's like, you know, another component that I can take with me to enjoy on a different level with this. It's brought me down so many great trips down memory lane. It's a lot of music I loved growing up like you. I was an alternative rock radio listener from the first, you know, moment that I can think of back then. So I just, I love it, man. 60 songs that explain the 90s. I can't wait to see what else you come up with here for the last few episodes.
Thank you so much, dude. This has been awesome. It's an honor.
Well, Rob, thank you very much. And hopefully somewhere down the line, we'll chat again. I've been looking forward to this moment.
Absolutely.
This was one of my things. I was like, I don't know if I want to talk to him because I'm such a fan that I'm going to fuck it up. I don't know if I want to do it.
I don't think you fucked it up. I think I fuck things up all the time, though. I don't want to tell you your business, but it seemed all right to me.
Big thank you to Rob Harvilla from 60 Songs That Explain the 90s. His book, titled the same, is available now. It would make a fantastic gift for any music fan in your life if you're trying to find something for the holidays. You know, I really, truly believe that. Thank you to all of you for listening. Until next time, be well.